Stop, the 1970s, dead zone, they erased from history. Look, I'm gonna tell you something most people were never meant to hear. In the mid-70s, a deep-sea dead zone started taking 3-minute breaths, oxygen up, oxygen gone, then the files vanished. Ships kinked their roots, labs got quiet, and a memo called it instrument error. One problem, the Navy rerouted anyway. Trust me, you're not ready. What I'm about to show you ties POLYMODE's rim transects to famous dives on the mid-Atlantic ridge, and to money that moved the map. 3 pillars hold it up: the signal clash, the resource gag, and the textbook scrub. Once you see this, there's no going back. The Vanishing Decade. The ocean was supposed to be slow. That's what the book said. Oxygen minimum zones sit like deserts, tidy and dull. But in the 1970s, the water twitched, and people with budgets to protect twitched faster. Picture this: peak Cold War. Americans and Soviets running joint cruises, smiling on deck, reporting to separate rooms at night. POLYMODE chasing internal waves and eddies, ocean weather most folks never see. Famous crawling the mid-Atlantic ridge in little subs, staring straight into the Earth's split lip. On paper, open science. In practice, every cast doubled as intel. Then the edge coughed. Right where dead water leans against a ridge shoulder, oxygen twitched up for minutes, not months. First read, a hiccup. Second cast, different sensor, same beat. Winkler bottles came back just high enough to matter. Too clean for noise, too fast for comfort. Get this, the signal hugged the rim and vanished off it like the slope itself was keeping time. On deck, it smelled like wet cable and burned coffee. A grad student taped the ugly spike to the bulkhead. Someone muttered biofouling, wiped the membrane, ran it again. Same pulse. You could feel the room tilt. This wasn't a cute anomaly. It messed with fleets, leases, and math. Because if dead water breathes at the edge, fish can stack in windows nobody mapped. If redox flips that fast, metals move, microbes sprint, and corrosion clocks rewrite themselves. Carbon budgets that assume smooth starvation suddenly hiccup. That's fisheries, climate, seabed mining, and submarine acoustics, all in one 3-minute rise. 4 reasons to care, 4 reasons to make it disappear. Meanwhile, famous divers, far from known vents, started bringing up basalt with pale films and a soft sulfur smell. Not a roaring smoker, just faint hints of electrons trading hands where textbooks said they shouldn't. Trace metals twitched with the oxygen, manganese up with the breath, down with the fade. Internal waves with a clean pitch, long ghosts pushing tongues of oxygen down the slope on a clock. It fit the timing perfectly, which made it worse. Clean patterns force hard choices. Here, where the human part cuts deep. Reviewers praised rigor, then stalled. Meeting minutes learned a new phrase: national relevance. A QA note slid through POLYMODE. High oxygen excursions reclassified as instrument artifacts. If that's true, explain the fleet desk quietly bending a training box around that same rim 3 days later. If the meters lied, why did the ships move? Inside the lab, loyalties split. One camp wanted to publish the safe stuff and keep funding. The other said smoothing spikes is just lying politely. A young tech started copying deck logs at night, practice reels labeled like junk because junk doesn't get audited. He wasn't chasing headlines. He just didn't want the ocean erased by a memo. The purge wasn't loud. It was a slow eraser. A station number dropped from a neat list, 41, then 43. A figure reissued with a stretched axis and a rounded shoulder where a tooth used to be. Microfilm in one library showed the twitch. The updated reel across the country didn't. Call it cleanup if you're generous. Call it control if you've ever watched a budget meeting. Are you sitting down? Because the edge breath showed up everywhere except in print. Fishermen working the rim hit 20-minute pockets that paid the mortgage, then took fines for crossing lines drawn on dead maps. Cable layers whispered about shock corrosion, runs no storm could explain. Navy acousticians trained for sensor shock events near the boundary, a beige phrase for don't trust your math when the rim inhales. To understand why this mattered, remember who lives there. Subs need stable layers to stay quiet. Cables need steady chemistry to stay whole. Rigs need coatings that don't age 10 years in a week. If the edge flips fast, you time your work or you bleed money. That's the entire market, right there, learning a clock the textbooks refused to print. One crew's log survived the smoothing. Smudged times. Repeat same probe, same, scribbled in the margin. It's not a smoking gun, it's a door. You see who was in the room the moment the language changed, and the day the track kinked around a polygon that didn't exist yesterday. The decade didn't vanish because nobody looked. It vanished because looking too close made powerful people solve expensive problems in public. So here's our map. 3 pillars. The signal clash, pulses the model couldn't hold, verified, then renamed noise. The Resource Gag, roots bent, leases hugged the rim, insurers invented sensor events, and navies trained in boxes that draped the breath. The textbook scrub, spikes shaved to shoulders, QA bullets teaching students to delete the seam before they ever saw it. Together, they turned a living edge into a tidy desert. This rabbit hole goes deeper. A cruise that slipped the index. A reroute pattern nobody explained. A corrosion patent that quietly admits the pulse. We'll separate what's documented from what we infer, and we'll show the exact beat where ships changed course and figures changed shape. Trust me, once you hear the clock, every smooth map starts to look like a lie told politely. The first signal, oxygen lies. They were back on station at dawn because nobody slept. The cabin smelled like burnt coffee and wet rope, and the sea looked like hammered slate. The CTD slid through the thermocline, bottles cocked, screens humming. The oxygen trace sagged just like the textbooks promised, and then it twitched, not a wobble. A clean 3-minute rise. 10 meters later, it did it again. Too crisp for noise, too brief to be a layer, no speeches, just a quiet, run it again. Redundancy was their religion, so they swapped the sensor, changed brands, polished membranes until they squeaked. They hung a Winkler bottle to check the chemistry in glass. Second drop, same depth, same clock. 3-minute breath right on time. The Winkler came back a hair higher than the downcast mean, just enough to matter, not enough to publish without a fight. Someone said biofouling. The tech shook his head. Membrane spotless. Numbers refused to move where the excuse pointed. They slid 30 miles along the contour like they were tracing a scar. The pulse followed the rim. Inside, the dead core flat as a table. On the shoulder, the line climbed, held, and dropped like a metronome. Off the slope, gone. The shape of the seafloor was keeping time. You could feel the lab breathe in, then hold it. Back in the wet lab, the metals started singing the same song. Manganese ticked up the instant oxygen rose, then fell when it faded. Iron chased a dirtier echo, quick hands grabbing and letting go. Redox doesn't flip for fun. Either a tongue of oxygen-rich water was sliding down the wall, or microbes were waking like a switch. The chemist whispered, "Too fast," and it wasn't doubt. It was grief for the ocean he'd been taught. Arguments got short and sharp. If the sensor was wrong, both brands failed together and the bottles lied with them. If the ocean was wrong, the global model was a cartoon. You don't say that on a POLYMODE deck unless you like losing ship time. A note slid across the bench. Vent proximate influence. Safe words for something happening miles from any mapped vent. The internal wave crew had the clean pitch. Picture a slow, invisible swell twisting the boundary. When it crests, it drags a tongue of surface-breathed water down the slope for a few minutes, then lets go. A pump with no pistons. It matched the timing. It hugged the rim. It turned an ocean desert into a lung that moved on a schedule you could miss between coffee and lunch. 2 labs drafted a tight note. Repeats, dual sensors, Winklers, no adjectives. They didn't get peer review. They got a call. Quality assurance clarifications. Same beige voice that tells you your passport is under review. A POLYMODE memo followed. Classify high oxygen excursions as instrumental artifacts due to transient flow. On deck, the grad student taped the spiky printout to the bulkhead with gray tape. The Pi peeled it off and slid it into a folder labeled Practice. Practice is for calibrations, not for a seam that breathes. FAMOUS had its own side puzzle. Divers came back from off-axis runs with basalt frosted in pale films, faint sulfur on the air, nowhere near a black smoker. Mats where mats didn't belong. If microbes were riding those pulses, this was their ledger. No headline, just a smell that nagged. They built a careful conference poster. Stacked profiles, flat, twitch, flat. A dotted trace hinting at phase, corner box with Winklers blipping up during the breath. A naval liaison stopped, smiled politely, asked for a copy. 2 weeks later, their ship time vanished for portfolio balance. Meanwhile, a fleet advisory bent a training box around the same rim for acoustic stability. If the meters lied, why did steel move? The team split down the middle. Publish safe, protect the program. Or keep the spike, tell the truth, risk the calls. The tape tech, the gray tape kid, started making midnight copies of deck logs and raw reels, labeling them practice because junk avoids audits. He wasn't leaking. He was future-proofing the truth. They chased the engine. A mooring they'd left on the rim came back alive. Oxygen riding the same beat. Temperature and current swaying like matched dancers. The edge breathed when the internal wave crested, exhaled when it passed. A structure, not a glitch. That's when the stakes stopped being theory. Fish would stack on those windows and vanish after. Close a line the wrong way, you starve boats. Open the wrong patch, you crush the only refuge the stock still uses. Decomposers would sprint during the breath, chewing carbon that models booked as locked. Add that up along 1,000 kilometers of edge, and your tidy budget hiccups into a different number. Metals would pit on the upbeat and sleep on the down. Cables, rigs, coatings. Timed failures if you pretend the clock isn't there. They prepped a bone-dry methods note. Dual sensors, phase match, Winkler's mooring confirmation. Review came back with one sentence that curdled the room. Reframe with unconventional behavior. Remove transients as noise. The modeler stared like the code had betrayed him. The grad student wrote in a notebook, "If it breathes and we call it noise, who are we for?" Then came the clean debunk. A rival crew sailed months later with a slow response sensor that smears anything under 10 minutes into a polite shoulder. Their plot was gorgeous. Their conclusion, no episodic oxygenation observed. Their sponsor list hummed with metals money. On a whiteboard, someone wrote, "Use a sundial, miss the hummingbird." Meanwhile, the helm logs nobody sanitized showed a speed dip and a coarse kink right where the breath beat hardest. Weather was calm. Instruments were not. Maps in classrooms stayed straight. Ships at sea did not. They didn't solve the mystery that week. They proved it existed and learned its mood. The RIM inhaled on a clock. The labs called it artifact. The Navy called it stability. The cable teams called it scheduling. The fishers called it Tuesday. And the ocean, stubborn as ever, just kept breathing. 3 pillars roadmap. Look, I'm gonna tell you something that's going to pay off the rest of the way. If you can hold 3 ideas in your head, the map stops lying. We call them the signal clash, the resource gag, and the textbook scrub. You felt pieces already on that deck: coffee, wet rope, the gray tape spike. But now we lay the tracks so you can see the moves before they happen. First, the signal clash. This is the ocean talking and the pipeline arguing back. On the rim, oxygen rose for 3 clean minutes, then fell. Dual sensors caught it, Winklers nudged with the beat, and a mooring rode the same clock through the night. Temperature, currents, and trace metals swayed in phase. It wasn't drama, it was structure. The clash came when quality assurance renamed it an artifact. The code learned to sand the breath flat, and clean figures got published while ships quietly bent around polygons that weren't on any public chart. Stakes, real people. Fish stacking in breath windows their permits deny. Cable teams timing splices like heart surgeons. Carbon math wobbling while models pretend seasons are smooth. The clash isn't chemistry versus electronics. It's truth versus a workflow that hates spikes. Second, the resource gag. This is steel and money learning the clock while pretending they don't. After those pulses showed up, root advisories bloomed along the rim with beige reasons, training, systems checks. Insurance riders grew a new phrase, sensor events. Cable memos mapped stability corridors that hugged the slow half of the breath. Mining scouts planted flags on shoulders, not centers, pitching enhanced boundary productivity while coatings quietly aged in dog years. Navies wrapped exercise boxes over the same edges for acoustic stability, which is sailor speak for don't trust your math when the layer flips. None of them said oxygen. Didn't need to, they priced it. The gag doesn't require a villain, it needs shared incentives. If a 3-minute breath-dense stealth pits sheaths and spins nodules, you reroute, reschedule, and rename. Public maps stay pretty. Private calendars move on the drum. Third, the textbook scrub. This one lives in margins and axes. Early drafts showed the tooth at the boundary with timid captions, possible episodic oxygenation. Committees blessed QA bullets, spikes became instrument artifacts. Final plates stretched the axis until the tooth rounded into a shoulder. Lecture slides taught students to flag jumps, smooth hard, and avoid overinterpreting transients. Code inherited the lesson, defaulted to filters, and drew the ocean it expected. Librarians swapped microfilm where one reel kept the twitch and another wore it down. A rival debunk sailed with slow ears, missed the hummingbird, and got canonized as clarity. That's how you train a generation to erase a seam before they've ever seen it. Here is how the pillars lock. Signal clash proves the beat is real, replicates, Winklers, mooring, phase. Resource gag explains why the truth goes mute. Money hates unplanned clocks. Textbook scrub makes the silence durable, slides and software that flatten the world. Together, they turn a live wire into a study aid and send anyone who listens back to the rim like a contrarian. Micro-stories keep you honest. A helm log shows a coarse kink on a calm day. A fish tote lands heavy for 20 minutes, then goes dead. A repair chief stalls a splice until telemetry stops pulsing. A corrosion spec adds short boundary excursions without saying why. A student toggles a filter and watches sawteeth appear where the atlas promised glass. None of those people need the word oxygen. They need the window. Trust me, you're not ready for how the receipts line up when we follow them. We've got a cruise station that vanished between 41 and 43, a reroute pattern that mirrors internal wave phase, and a corrosion filing that quietly bakes the breath into coatings. We'll mark what's documented and what we infer, and we'll keep the humans in frame. Text duplicating reels, clerks microfilming, temporary guidance, skippers drawing pencil pockets on dead maps. Once you hear the rim's clock, you can't unhear it. The smooth chart breaks first in your head, then on paper, then under steel. The next beat is where the paper trail blinks. The signal clash, chemistry that shouldn't exist. Look, I'm gonna tell you something simple first. The sea handed them a metronome and the paperwork tried to smash it. They parked on the rim with a repeat station, same latitude, same depth, because that's where the gray tape spike first bit. The first downcast eased into the oxygen minimum like the Atlas promised, then rose clean for 3 minutes like a held breath. The upcast echoed a soft version of the same move, which mattered because upcasts usually smear noise. Echo means structure. Redundancy wasn't a slogan, it was survival. They ran dual oxygen sensors from different makers on the frame and clipped an older, trusty cell on a separate wire. All three heard the lift within seconds of each other. Then the bottles came up from that depth, Winkler titrations nudging higher right on the window. Not a trumpet blast, more like a footstep in a quiet hall, but in phase with the spike. The kind of rise you can't publish without a war, but you also can't forget. They tested the rim itself like a rail. Steering the ship along the contour, they kept station with the sloped shoulder, and the pulse followed like a shadow. Slide off the wall and it vanished. Sit on the shoulder and it snapped back into time. Inside the dead core, the trace went flat as a hospital beep. On the lip, 3 up, 10 down, repeat. Even the current meter pulsed with it, like the room's lights kept brightening and dimming on a schedule. Back in the lab, trace metals joined the chorus. Manganese spiked the instant oxygen rose and fell when it faded. Iron chased the same dance with a slight lag, dirty from quick grabs and releases. Redox doesn't spin that fast unless you change the air or wake something hungry. The chemist rubbed his eyes and whispered, "Too fast," and then started swapping reagents like a man trying to rule out denial. Here's where the human tells give the game away. A Soviet colleague tapped the plot with a nicotine-stained finger and said, "Wave," like he was naming a cousin. He'd seen a shelf in the Black Sea bite back on storms, short, mean breaths that made and broke fisheries in hours. The American pie nodded and in the same motion asked him not to say it in the joint summary. That's a wall you feel, not one you see. Meanwhile, a mooring they'd left to babysit the rim came back with the ocean's diary. Oxygen, temperature, salinity, and current vectors rode the same long internal wave beat all night. No deck handling, no cable chatter, just the deep writing in clean ink. When the wave crested, oxygen rose and the current folded toward the slope. When it troughed, everything exhaled. You don't get that from a sticky membrane. Now stakes. Fish live on seconds when maps pretend seasons. If the rim inhales, schools sprint into that window, feed, and fall out again. Close the wrong side of that line and you starve boats while pretending to save them. Carbon's worse. Decomposition in low oxygen water crawls. Give it a breath and it runs. Multiply 3-minute sprints by 1,000 kilometers of rim and you tilt budgets that power policies. Metals hurt fastest. Every upbeat chews coatings, wakes microbes that eat steel, and wipes months off a cable in a single night. The modeler tried to stuff this truth into a pipeline built to fear teeth. The auto-filters flagged the upflicks as outliers, binned them, and redrew the cast as a respectable shoulder. He widened the window, the spike came back angrier. He smoothed harder, it hid as a bulge the ship never actually saw. That's how you sand the world until it's polite. That's also how you lie without intending to. They wrote the driest methods note of their lives. Dual sensors, independent cell, Winklers, mooring phase match, internal wave timing. No adjectives, no claims beyond. It repeats. The reply arrived in that beige voice every field scientist learns to dread. Reframe within conventional behavior, remove transients as noise, coordinate interpretations before circulation. Translation, flatten the breath and mail us the ashes. Get this, while the memo warmed the copier, the helm logged a slowdown and a small course kink right where the rim's beat was loudest. Weather, calm, sea, glass, reason scribbled in the margin, ops. Unknown to the deckhands, a naval advisory had just bent a box over that same contour for acoustic stability. The meters were wrong officially. The steel disagreed. A rival lab sailed months later with a sensor designed to miss hummingbirds. Low response, low noise, very sponsor-friendly. Their figure was smooth as a brochure. Conclusion, no episodic oxygenation. The metal's foundation at the bottom of their acknowledgments glowed like a lighthouse. In a break room far away, a tech wrote, "If you choose the slow ear, you won't hear the drum," and pinned it beside the coffee maker. Meanwhile, famous side dives brought back basalt with pale films and a faint sulfur hello far from any mapped vent. No press release. Just a smell and a microscope note. Mats where mats shouldn't be. The kind of clue that makes you stare at the rim and wonder if microbes time their lives to a clock your pipeline calls an error. This is where everything clicks or cracks. The signal clash isn't mystical. The ocean breathed on a schedule you can mark with a pencil. Hardware agreed. Chemistry agreed. A mooring agreed without human hands touching it. The only thing that didn't agree was the pathway from deck to figure. And that pathway had learned a habit: protect clarity, punish teeth. Trust me, you're not ready for what happens when habits meet proof. The ship's next posted line arrived curved. The grant language went beige. A QA slide for new leads landed with 3 bullets. Flag jumps, smooth, hard, avoid overinterpretation. In classrooms, the shoulder replaced the tooth. Out at sea, a repair chief stared at pitted sheath and waited for a window only a liar would call noise. So the signal clash stands. 3 minutes up, 10 down, repeat. Internal waves drag breath along a live wire. Fish stack, metals flip, carbon sprints, sonar bends. The deep isn't flat or slow. It inhales. And the only honest thing left to ask is who decided the breath didn't belong on the page and why their maps still kink when it shows up. Evidence trail, the crews that vanished. 3 days after the mooring sang, the paper trail started to get jumpy. The transect log looked like piano keys, 41, 42, 43, except the typed table suddenly skipped the middle note. Station 42 was gone. The deck book still had a dawn cast penciled in with sloppy gloves, but the official bundle printed a clean line through empty water. On the master chart, a faint X hid under a thumb smear of eraser gloss right where the rim was loudest. Unknown to the science team, a clerk across town picked up a polite call from a naval liaison. New process, they said. Anomaly tagged, casts would be held for QA before release. It sounded boring on purpose. She stamped hold on a manila folder and slid it into an unlabeled drawer. That drawer would start swallowing more folders than anyone admitted. Back on the ship, the gray tape grad found a cardboard box under the bench stamped practice. Lab policy said raw duplicates don't get archived, so practice was how you made them invisible. Inside sat 7 magnetic reels, each scrawled with station numbers, one with a shaky 42. He threaded the tape, listened to the hiss, and watched header tones locked to the ship clock. Depth ladder slid clean, then there it was, the same 3-minute rise in phase with the internal wave beat. Practice, my ass. Meanwhile, the helm log that nobody thought to sanitize showed a speed dip and a tiny course kink right where 42 should have been. Weather, calm, sea, glass, reason, ops. You don't slow a research vessel on a flat day unless someone told you that patch bites back. The printed cruise track later showed a perfect straight line through that spot, like the ocean had been ironed after the fact. 3 days earlier, a letter on heavy paper had landed in the Pi's mailbox. Until variances were resolved, further work in those coordinates wasn't advised due to clearance implications. That phrase didn't belong anywhere near a Winkler bottle. He folded the letter twice, tucked it into a book, and told the team to prioritize core objectives. Translation: steer off the rim. Parallel stories kept leaking through human hands. A rival lab rushed a no pulses here note using a famously sluggish oxygen sensor that smears anything under 10 minutes into a polite shoulder. Their figure was gorgeous, their conclusion tidy, and their sponsor list ended with a metals foundation. In a break room 2 floors down, a tech taped a handwritten line to the kettle. Use the slow ear, miss the drum. Across an ocean, a shipping circular put a beige advisory box over the same rim. Transient sensor degradation possible. No reason listed. Same week, an oil major extended its reconnaissance window for operational efficiencies along that shoulder. Fishermen working the edge scribbled "good pocket" in pencil on charts they never showed to inspectors. 20-minute hauls, then dead again, like the sea was breathing around a metronome only the boats could hear. The archive hardened around the gap. The national database accepted the clean tables without raw spikes, citing smooth to consensus. One university's microfilm still flashed the tooth. Another's glossy substitute wore a rounded shoulder. Errata listed typos, never axes. Temporary QA guidance memo, no accession number, appeared in minutes, not catalogs. You can call that sloppiness. Stack enough sloppiness in one direction, it starts to look like policy. Get this, months later, a cable seminar in a windowless room rolled a slide labeled shock corrosion incidents. The failure histogram thrummed with that same 3-minute beat. The presenter didn't say oxygen, he didn't have to. His fix was a coding spec tuned for short boundary excursions. Different building, same clock. Even the scientist's own house wasn't safe. A training packet for new QA leads landed with 3 bullets. Flag high oxygen jumps, apply standardized smoothing, avoid overinterpretation. That single slide could delete a decade with a click. Students learned to pass labs by erasing the seam. Code inherited the lesson. Maps stayed smooth, ships didn't. Microstories kept the pulse alive. A data clerk microfilmed temporary guidance and shelved a duplicate under an older series where purges go to die. A Soviet colleague with a cigarette tap said wave and got asked not to say it in the joint write-up. A corrosion engineer scrawled O2 in a failure folder and crossed it out, then kept the dates anyway. A diver wrote edge breath again in a pocket notebook after smelling faint sulfur on off-axis basalt. None of them traded secrets. They just refused to throw away what their hands touched. The grad with the reels pulled one last quiet trick. He mailed a duplicate of 42 to himself, sealed, postmarked, never opened. Years later, after a long night with a crying baby, he slit it with a butter knife and cried at the hiss. The beat was still there. He hadn't captured glory, he'd captured time. Here's the tell that locked it for me. The fleet desk bent a training box around that rim for acoustic stability. The same weak POLYMODE labeled those spikes instrument error. If the meters lied, why did steel move? If Station 42 never happened, why did the helm slow on glass water? If the ocean was flat, why did insurance invent sensor events and cable chiefs wait to splice like surgeons watching a heart? The cruise didn't vanish. It was escorted into a drawer, laundered through a smoothing window, and replaced with a straight line that never sailed. The rim kept breathing. The paper track learned to hold its breath, and between them sat a cardboard box stamped practice that refused to forget. The Resource Gag, the Reroute pattern. While the lab learned to hold its breath, steel learned to flinch. Routes that used to run straight across the basin started growing elbows. Captains called them kinks. Planners called them efficiencies. Either way, the line curved right where the rim's clock beat loudest. You didn't need clearance to feel it. Public advisories bloomed as beige polygons. Training areas, system checks, calibration windows, always rotated just so, draped across the slope like tinted film. Radio chatter blamed weather, but the buoy logs read calm. Ships slid wide anyway, like they'd been warned the water itself might bite. Insurance smelled it first and translated breath into law. New riders slipped into hull and cable policies, quiet clauses about sensor events and transient signal environments. Not storms, sensors. If your route crossed the rim without a mitigation plan, your premium climbed. Sell a stability corridor that hugged the slow half of the beat and your rate got friendly. Underwriters don't argue philosophy, they price it. Navies never said oxygen out loud. They didn't have to. Notices carved boxes along oxygen minimum rims with bland codes and tidy dates. Inside, acousticians drilled crews on sensor shock events, propagation paths bending wrong during short excursions. Stability equals stealth. A pulsing boundary kills both. So they trained in silence, consortia learned in beige and left the textbooks to failure clusters nipped at the shoulder like teeth, always in runs that made no sense on a weather map. Internal memos sketched reroutes that looked like spaghetti, then circled short arcs labeled stability corridors. Repair ships loitered over flat seas, waiting out a window no forecast printed. When the beat eased, they spliced like surgeons and steamed home. Public reports blamed anchors. Deckhands blamed timing. Mining scouts moved like chess players who'd already seen the endgame. Lease filings stacked along shoulders, not centers. Prospectuses purred about enhanced boundary productivity and low-variance microenvironments. Euphemisms for sit near the metronome but not on it. Codings aged in dog years when you mistimed. Nodules likely grew in fits. Rigs scheduled work to dodge the bite. The only forbidden word was breath. Labs that tried to chase the rim ran headfirst into a smiling wall. Proposals praising boundary transients earned warm reviews and cold scores. Realigned scope, premature focus, risk to core objectives. The same week a naval box draped the slope for exercises. A program officer asked a PI to de-emphasize boundary events and nudged the crews 10 miles inland, close enough to smell the seam, too far to see it breathe. One indie consortium slipped through with fast sensors and burst sampling. 48 hours of gorgeous pulses, dead center on phase, then the bridge telex clattered. Suspend for security review. They steamed to the middle and took polite water. On land, a rival paper sponsored by Metal's money sailed a slow response sensor across the rim and declared serenity. Editors loved the calm. Students memorized it. Operators quietly ignored it. This is going to sound crazy, but the gag didn't need villains. It only needed alignment. Navies wanted stable sound. Cables wanted predictable chemistry. Miners wanted timed growth without timed rot. Insurers wanted clocks you could sell. 4 rooms, 4 budgets, 1 curve. The language harmonized by inertia. Instrument error in QA became sensor event in insurance, training box in notices, optimization in routing. Everyone pointed at a different noun and traced the same line. Are you sitting down? Because the cleanest tells live in timing. Lease bids rose right after advisory boxes expired. Insurance riders tightened right after clusters of sensor events. Mining DMOS splashed during quiet weeks, then went black through pulse windows. Cable lays waited out flat water because flat chemistry mattered more. That's not superstition. That's choreography. Micro-stories make it real. A London cable room, stale tea and tracing paper, 3 men over a chart. Delay 48 hours, one says. Internal activity likely. Weather turns out fine, the lay holds, the failure log stays blank. A bridge watch on a research ship slows 5 knots on glass water, writes ops, and keeps his mouth shut. A fisheries skipper whispers good pocket to a cousin, hauls heavy for 20 minutes, then ghosts back over the line. None of them say oxygen. They don't need to, they know the window. Behind the scenes, procurement learned new verbs. Coding specs called for resilience to short boundary excursions. Sonar RFPs demanded faster auto-recalibration in transient layers. Survey contracts required adaptive routing when sensors degrade. If you spoke that dialect, you were in the club. If you said breath on paper, you were not. University maps didn't budge. New atlases shaved the elbows clean. Lecture slides graded students for flattening blips. A QA training packet taught 3 bullets, flag jumps, smooth hard, avoid overinterpretation, and erased a decade with a smile. Out at sea, steel kept paying the toll on time. Look, I'm gonna tell you something plain. The resource gag isn't a memo, it's a habit. Rename the breath, price the window. Bend the route, smile for the press. Everyone keeps their lane and the public keeps the map. The result is 2 oceans, the one you can teach and the one you can sail. The human cost hides in trust. Captains fined for crossing dead lines that weren't dead. Students trained to erase Saudi, they'll spend careers dodging. Scientists told to harmonize, while repair chiefs watch telemetry like a heartbeat. You can hold the lie for only so long before the bill lands in hands with grease on them. Wait until you see what the bill looked like the week a line went black on a comm sea. The splice team waited for a window. A board said oxygen shock corrosion behind a locked door. A naval box flickered over the slope. That's the gag's punchline. They all knew the clock, they just never printed it. Countermoves, gags, and grants. While roots bent and premiums learned new adjectives, the labs walked into a smiling wall that called itself process. Calls for ship time went out. Proposals came back sharp. Fast sensors, burst sampling, sit on the rim and hold phase with internal waves. Reviewers praised rigor, then circled one phrase, boundary transients, and the scores slid. Realigned scope, premature focus, risk to core objectives.